Hello, 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 debt-free degree beloveds. Y'all, I am so excited about who I am bringing to talk to you about today. And let me tell you, this lady has so much wisdom. There is so much amazingness that she has done in terms of college and financial aid. And we're going to dig into all of that. Y'all know that generally I am always say no to the loan, say yes to financial freedom. However, I frequently encounter people that have to take loans for whatever reason, like they didn't put the steps in place early enough, or they've already accrued loans. And so, this beautiful expert is going to be really helpful with that. So, with that, I'm going to introduce to y'all Angie Carlson. Angie, tell us just a little bit about you and your company, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah, so my company is Carlson Financial Coaching LLC, where I help people become someone who's not only financially responsible, but also financially fulfilled. And in my prior life, I was a financial aid director. I spent 10 years working in student aid, 7 years as the director. So I got to know the student loan system inside and out, how the data goes back and forth between schools, reporting, how mistakes get made, repayment follow up, all that good stuff. And then also on the front end, like how like awards are calculated, what goes into that calculation, why things change. So I know that all inside and out.
Phenomenal. So y'all, you can see why I'm so excited because I will be honest with y'all, this interview could easily be 2 hours. I'm going to keep it to about 20 minutes. And so we're going to get in and get the big nuggets. And then she's got her contact information there, particularly on Instagram. So y'all go follow her on Instagram because she shares amazing information there, and you'll see her Insta handle right there. Okay, so Angie, one of the things that you and I talked about when we had our pre-interview was the statistic that 10 to 15% of your students, when you were director of financial aid, graduated completely debt-free. And I want to dig into that a little bit because what that says to me is 85 to 90% are not, which is overwhelming, which is part of this message, but also there are people that are doing it. And so, can you talk about, from a financial aid director point of view, did you ever see it as part of your role to help people graduate either debt free or with as few loans as possible?
Oh, absolutely. Like we would encourage students to take as less as we could. And
Okay.
what was challenging for that is our hands actually got tied by the Department of Ed, basically saying you have to tell students the loans they're eligible for. Like you can't just go out and say only borrow this. You have to tell them the most they can borrow. And so that made it hard on the education efforts because sometimes you see, hey, I can have all this, you can take it. And that's actually within the student's rights to do because the school is not supposed to make those decisions for the student.
Okay. 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 I, d- I do see that that is a pro student stance, to let them know what they're eligible for. It also, it's just part of the higher education industrial complex. Just how can we, so that's, it's a bit disheartening because I'm sure if you're talking to 18-year-olds and their families, and sometimes you're only talking to the student
Mhm.
because they're the one having to make the information. And if you're like, yes, you need to borrow this, but you're eligible for this, well, why not just borrow all of that?
Yeah, and that's the freedom and the beauty of people making their own decisions. And so that's, whatever the student decided, if it was within the parameters of what we could do, we had to honor their wishes. And so, which was, great because you want students to be empowered and make the best decisions for them, but also it was also kind of frustrating because the Department of Ed also has metrics for schools to keep them accountable for what students borrow. And it's like, you can't, like, I can't do both. Like, I have to meet this, but my tools to meet this are taken away from me. And
Wow.
so there were some times that I spent a lot of time frustrated. And that's one of the main reasons I left was I just got so frustrated. And it wasn't that I didn't want to solve the problems. I was all for it. But I also was like, I have done everything in my power to do what I can to help and solve and change things. And I'm not going to say it wasn't enough, but it wasn't going to translate in ways I wanted it to. And so I had to get very real with like, I love my school, love the people I worked for, love the students. I just couldn't handle the system anymore. I was just coming home really frustrated every night, and that was taking over my family time, my personal life. And I'm like, that's not worth it to me.
Yes, exactly, exactly, exactly. My heart goes out to you in that regard because that has to be one of the toughest jobs on any college campus. And
Oh,
go ahead.
absolutely. And it's also the least understood
Hmm.
because, it's, student wants to come and, drop a class, for example, that impacts their financial aid if you're at a term-based school. And, people in the, billing department may not understand, like, you have this money on the tuition bill, now you have to send it back. Like, that was paying us. And
Hmm.
so there's all these different rules and regulations you have to follow. That's on the government side. And even on the scholarship side, a lot of scholarship agencies are starting to withhold the scholarship until the student completes the semester of college. And so
Wow.
that's getting frustrating too. Well, it makes sense because you don't want to give a scholarship to a student who drops, and then depending on aid calculations and all that, that's really complex. Some aid might get to stay on the account, some aid might have to go back to the government. And so the school can hold that outside scholarship for the bill because it was paid in full and wasn't any instructions not to do that. But a lot of scholarship agencies have learned about that, and that frustrates them, it frustrates their donors. And so they are now some of them are saying they got to be in school for at least one semester before we pay anything on their account. And so it makes it really hard that first semester of school because you're not sure what to pay, and then that balance is higher.
Right, 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 right. So for the folks that did the let's just generously say the 15% of your student population who did earn a debt-free degree, of that 15%, how many of them were from wealthy families that just simply wrote a check versus how many of them put my triangle approach into play, which is, the student had some sort of input, their friends and family and, the people they were familiar with had some input, and then they leveraged other people's money.
That I don't even recall the stats on that. I just was
Okay.
like, we had it, we were done. It was, it was there.
Okay. 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 Just anecdotally, do you, because this is the one of the pushbacks. This is why I'm asking you this. This is
Mhm.
one of the pain points is people will push back on debt-free degree and say we're not a wealthy family. Well, debt-free degree is 100% for people who have zero saved for college. It's not for wealthy families that can write a check. So how do you,
I'm with you now. Yeah.
thank
So
you. Yeah.
basically, the biggest thing it comes down to with that is school choice. Of course, it's much easier to get a debt-free degree at a community college than it is probably going to be at your private four-year school. It's easier to get a debt-free degree at a state school or a trade school than a private school. So a lot of it comes down to school choice.
Okay.
By
Okay.
far, the number one factor, school choice.
Excellent, 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 excellent. And in the grit blueprint, the R is return on investment. So that's exactly what you're saying too, is you've got to look at how much it's going to cost you and then back that out. And because there are a lot of private schools right now that their cost of attendance per year is approaching $100,000.
Yeah, absolutely. And while that whole $100,000 isn't necessarily billable to the student, tuition 50 some thousand, you get 40,000 in scholarships, you've still got a sizable bill.
Hmm.
And for some families, they are going to be able to write that check and some aren't. So that's why
Hmm.
school choice is so important in the conversation.
Yes, yes, yes. So, I think it was you that was explaining to me that, because I get wonky here with understanding. I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly. So it used to be that I would say to students, go out and get scholarships to cover what you need for tuition, books, fees, room, and board. And
Mhm.
apparently, there are some scholarships that are written for tuition only. So if you get an exorbitant amount of scholarships, let's say your tuition is 5,000, but you've got $10,000 in scholarships that say they only cover tuition. Like
Mhm.
I thought that 5,000 would kind of go over the bill, but they're very specific. Am I saying that correctly? And
Yeah,
if
yep,
so,
you're
can
saying
you?
that correctly
Okay.
because when financial aid puts the offers together, basically each check comes with its own set of rules and criteria. And so what we have to do is take all this aid that the student received and make it play well together on the playground. And if you've ever been with kids on the playground, we've got some personalities, we've got a little fun, some drama, all the good stuff. And so it's basically like that. And so when you have the example of tuition of $5,000 and you've got aid that is all tuition restricted, it can only go to cover that $5,000. So if you have an excess of tuition restricted scholarships, it's actually against the criteria of the scholarship to put it towards anything else.
Okay.
So you either have to send it back to the scholarship agency and maybe they'll pick another recipient or work with them to be like, hey, can some of this be delayed till sophomore year
Okay.
because of all the tuition restricted? And I mean, a lot of like veterans benefits are usually tuition restricted. State aid, normally tuition restricted.
Okay.
Private school presidential scholarships, normally tuition restricted. And when you think about getting scholarships and donors, it's a lot easier for people to donate to tuition, knowing it's going to help the education than like living expenses and books and
Okay.
fees.
Okay. 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 Uh, I could sit and listen to you speak and teach all day long. Like the way you break it down makes it so easy to understand, and also it's very categorical. Like here's something. So one of the things that students need to think about when they're looking at scholarships is making sure that they're not only applying for tuition restricted scholarships.
Correct. And also, depending on what type of school you want to go to, you don't want schools that like you don't want degrees, scholarships that are degree seeking. So if you're going to like a community college for like a welding degree, you're not getting a bachelor's. So you can get that scholarship, but since you're not in a degree seeking program, you can't use it at the school. So
Okay.
you have to really make sure that the scholarship you're applying for actually apply to the degree that you want.
Wow, wow, wow. Well, like I said, you are such a fountain of knowledge. We could talk just about this. However, I want folks to know what you're doing today and how you can help students and families who are going to college and all of your expertise. And so let's dig into what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm actually doing a couple things is sometimes, having conversations on the front end before you call the financial aid office is a really good idea because once the financial aid office hears something, they have to act on it. So you might ask a question that seems very innocent and your student could potentially lose financial aid when you ask that question. And so I can be that sounding board and help you phrase those questions in a way where you get your answers that you want and you can also keep as much aid as possible. Now, there's going to be times that we can't avoid it, but whatever we can do to keep it within obviously law and legality, we will do. And then the other thing is if you have gone to school and you have student loan debt and you're in repayment, I can help you with getting a plan for that in place. I know how to read the loan records. I can see
Wow.
what's going on. Like, because sometimes you think you may need to call your servicer, and in most cases that's true, but I've seen cases where it's not true. And so really helping you navigate that student loan system so that you know you're in the best plan for you is another thing I can help with.
Wow. 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 Okay, so for both of those services, could you tell a story about how you worked with a student and or a family on the front end, how you counseled them before they called financial aid and what that outcome was, and then similarly on the back end for the loan repayment?
Yeah, I had a client that she was in school for a couple years. She was getting ready to start year three, and she just didn't know that you could decline student loans. She just thought if you put them on the aid offer, you took it. And so when she worked with me, I was like, well, all your scholarships are going to actually overpay your account and you're going to get a check back. And so she was like, oh, so I can decline these loans. And then she was like, but what if I need them? I'm like, you still have the option to borrow it in November. Now, some aid offices aren't going to like you doing that, but it's also well within your legal rights because you get the
Excellent.
right to change your mind. And
Excellent.
so, try it out. And if you feel like you need it, you can always go and ask for it, but just see what happens when you don't have it. And so she decided to cancel the loans for this upcoming school year. So she'll be doing this year debt free.
Wow. 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 Before you move to that next story, can I ask a question? You said you made the statement that she was going to, because of overages, she was going to get a check.
Mhm.
So how is that? How is that different than the tuition restricted, where I thought the overflow could go to other things?
Yes, some of the aid, some of the grants she had on her account weren't restricted to tuition. They could go help with books and living expenses and all of that. So in her case, her scholarships were not all tuition restricted.
Okay. But
So
even
since it wasn't tuition, like if it can go to any part of cost of attendance, that's fabulous. And she had some that could do that.
okay.
She did have some that was restricted to tuition, but they were less than the tuition owed. And then everything else could go to other parts of the cost of attendance or help. And she did have one that could help with living expenses.
Okay.
So that's how she got the overage back on scholarships.
Okay. So then, so if you've got all these scholarships and you're making sure that, it's not just tuition, that it covers living expenses, all the things, and there's still an overage per semester, then it is possible to get paid
Hmm.
basically to go to college.
Absolutely.
You just have to be savvy about the ones you're applying for. And okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. Okay. And then on the other end with the student loan repayment,
Mhm.
tell us a story about that. Even though there's a little bit in debt free degree brain that I'm like,
Yeah.
I know
Well,
about student loan repayment, but also people are out there and they're doing it, Angie, and I want to be a good resource. So,
yeah. So I had a client that came to me and they were looking for a financial coach who specifically dealt with student loans because they had had a student loan since the 90s. The wife joked that when she married her husband, she married him in his student loan debt. And we affectionately called the student loan debt the mistress in all of our sessions. And And they were like, it was supposed to be forgiven after 25 years and it wasn't forgiven. I looked at it and in 30 seconds, I knew why it hadn't been forgiven. And it was because the loan type was wrong. And so every time they were calling their servicer, they were asking, like, are federal loans forgiven? Answer is yes. Servicer technically answered all their questions directly, but the client didn't know they had the wrong type of federal loan for forgiveness. And so what they had to do was consolidate it into the appropriate type for forgiveness, reapply for a program, which it doesn't exist right now. The department shut it down, but we were able to catch it in the window when it existed. And then a year after we worked together, they called me like one morning at like 8 a.m. my time, which they were on the West Coast. And I'm like, did somebody die? Like they're calling me at like 6 in the morning, like, what's wrong? And like it's just screaming in the phone. And it was like, oh my God, oh my God. And I'm like, and I'd like forgotten about it. I'm like, what? They're like, this is home, the mistress, she's gone. I'm like, oh, congratulations. Because I mean, I was still half asleep too, but
oh,
they
wow.
were just like, oh my gosh, like your coaching investment was worth every penny. They're like, we would have never, like, even though it was something so simple, they just would have never have known to look for it.
That's right. That's
And they
right.
were asking all the right questions, but because they weren't using one particular word, they and the servicer weren't speaking the same language.
One particular word. Y'all, this is why every single one of you needs to be following Angie on Instagram. And for those of you that either are about to, step into accepting financial aid, get on her calendar and use her as a resource to know what to ask and what to say before you meet with them. And then on the back end, for those of you that are carrying some student loan debt, get on the back end, get with her. Angie, you just have such a beautiful way of like love exudes out of you, and my folks know that that debt free degree falls under love revolution. And that was one of the things that was so compelling about you when I met you, is that it really, like, you care so deeply, and also everything that you do is so mathematical and logical. And sometimes with love, like I talk about love as a choice, but sometimes that I'll just say, being 35 years in and around higher ed, I'm not sure how often I felt a sense of love in financial aid offices. That's how I'll say it.
Yeah, well, it makes sense because it's like the office that brings up the most frustration. So, I mean, I definitely got calls that were heated. And but I'm also like, I get it because you're trying to figure out a system that's very confusing, it's very overwhelming. I mean, there were times I struggled to figure it out and I was in it every day. So, of course, the average person was going to struggle with it. And the big thing was just really being like, hey, I get that it's frustrating. I get that you spent, 10, 20 hours on this. I know you have better things to do with your time. I wish I could take part of this off your plate and just really be understanding and empathetic. But that's also hard in a financial aid environment where it's fast paced and we just had they just had the FAFSA debacle, which I thank God I was out of the office by then. But there's
Oh,
been all these
yes.
challenges that have fallen on aid offices that have really taken the support people off the phones because they need to go in the back end. So even, by the time you try to get through to somebody, you've been on hold for a bit of time. No wonder you're hot. Like
Yeah.
I know, I mean, if I'm on hold for a period of time, I have to really like watch myself and that person picks up the phone and not like be upset with them because
Yes.
it's like they're doing all they can do.
Yes.
And the last thing they need, especially if I want good service, the last thing they need is somebody screaming at them.
Yes, 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 yes. Yes, that's so true. Well, like I said, I could talk to you all day. I find you fascinating and amazing and so love filled. And thank you for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're so welcome. It was fun.
All right. Until next time, this is Pontification with a Pro for Debt Free Degree. And I will see y'all next time, beloveds. And thank you for joining us. Bye bye.